So, welcome everyone to the February 2026 monthly presentation of the Institute for Historical Study. I'm Jim Gasparini, the Vice President of the Institute for the next month about. And before I introduce today's presenter, why don't I remind everyone that next month, in March, we will hear from David Mustardi. His forthcoming book, Western publisher Paul Elder and Company, will be published by the Book Club of California this spring, and that's the subject of his presentation. So today we're hearing from Dan Kohanski, who was a longtime member of the Institute and for the past few years has served on the board. Apocryphal Press published his book, A God of Our Invention, How Religion Shaped the Western World, in 2023. He recently became interested in the questions of how World War I started and whether something like it could happen again for similar reasons. And since then has been researching the histories and the sources. So take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Jim. Let me start by sharing my screen. So you should all be able to see my slideshow. It's coming up right there. What triggered World War I and why it might happen again? This is one of the most complex topics in historical research. This really, just the information I've gathered in the last few months is enough to start a semester-long graduate school seminar. I'm going to try to do this in 45 minutes, so I may be running a little fast. Bear with me. We're recording this, so if you miss something or it goes by too quickly, you can always check the record. There were probably like 25,000 books written in the last decade or two on World War I as the centennial comes. These are some of the books I found most useful. There will be a bibliography at the end of this presentation as well. If I had to pick one book, and it is difficult, I would probably pick The July Crisis by 𝘖𝘕 He is a scholar of diplomatic history, and he teaches in England, which means he gives slightly more credence to the British lead up to the war than some others might, but I think generally he has been very accurate and successful. So this is a map of Europe on the eve of World War I. You can see that it's basically divided into the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, although as we'll very quickly see, it's a lot more complicated than that. The Triple Alliance, before I do that, the great powers, as Europeans then and historians now talk about them, generally mean the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. Many times they include Italy, many times they don't. That's why Italy is a little bit hesitant there. So we begin with the Triple Alliance, which dates back to 1890s. It mainly consists of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Italy is sometimes questionable partner for historical reasons. Also, they only came together as a country in 1871, and they're still not quite settled. In addition to that, there is a secret partner, Romania. I'm not sure how secret it is, since there's some mentions of it in the literature in 1913, 1914. The real backbone of the alliance, though, is the alliance between Vienna and Berlin, that is Austria-Hungary and the German Empire. These were the two strongest members of the alliance, and they backed each other. To a great extent, each of them considered themselves the only ally of each other. This will be very important later on. The Triple Entente is not an alliance, it's an entente, which is people agree to work together. This is the United Kingdom of Great Britain, France, and Russia. It dates to around 1904 and 1907. It's constructed in different ways. There is, however, an alliance between France and Russia, which dates to 1894, and this is much stronger because France and Russia agreed to come to each other's aid militarily, the same as Germany and Austria do. Britain does not. Britain is aware of this alliance, but is not sure of all the conditions and doesn't really want to be held to conditions of an alliance it doesn't know everything about. Germany is also very nervous about this alliance because this creates the possibility of a two-front war. Germany may have to fight France on one side and Russia on the other at the same time. Nobody really likes to do that. Other major player in this map is the Ottoman Empire. In the mid-19th century, it included all the area that you see in the brown oval there, the Balkans, basically, not Greece. Greece got its independence in 1821. It also includes Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is in this area right here. By 1914, the era of this map, the Ottoman Empire was reduced to the part of Europe that you see there. All of these countries were now independent, although they were a bone of contention between Russia and Austria-Hungary, contending for influence in that area. We'll see this as we go along. Bosnia-Herzegovina is now part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This will become very important, as we'll see. The last country I want to point out in this map is Belgium. Belgium is a neutral country, as is Luxembourg, but Belgium is the more important one. Since 1839 or 1840, the various powers have guaranteed its neutrality. Originally, this meant the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and Prussia, but in 1871, when Prussia became the German Empire, Germany inherited Prussia's obligations. So Belgium is neutral by treaty, and the various powers guarantee that. There are many factors driving Europe towards war. Two of them are the personalities of the leaders, good, bad, mostly bad, and indifferent. And the other factor I want to look at is ethno-nationalism, which is the idea that an ethnicity should have a country or should be involved in the country. There's a subset of ethno-nationalism called irredentism, which specifically refers to the idea that if a majority of the people in a region are of one ethnicity, that ethnicity should rule that whole region, that whole geographic region. So there are three crises to World War I that have ethno-nationalist elements. First is when Austria becomes Austria-Hungary in 1867. Then in 1908, 1909, this is what is known as the Bosnian crisis, where Austria-Hungary decides to annex it. We'll explain that later on. And then in 1914, Franz Ferdinand is shot, and then we take off for World War I. First crisis. This is 1867. Austrian Empire was a conglomerate of many different nationalities. One of the main nationalities was Hungarians or Magyars. In 1866, the Austrian Empire fought a war with Prussia, which is before it became Germany. They lost it, and the Magyars threatened to revolt. This is highly significant because the Magyars were the main political and economic power in the Hungarian part of the empire. Magyar sometimes means Hungarian, and the Magyar language is Hungarian. I distinguish between them, as do many historians, because there were a lot more ethnic groups in the area known as Hungary than just the Magyars. The Magyars dominated. So next year, the emperor, Franz Joseph, by the way, I'll be referring to emperor as the Austrian emperor, the Austro-Hungarian emperor, Kaiser is the German, Kaiser Wilhelm, Tsar, of course, is Tsar Nicholas, and the king, sure, occasionally, is King George of England. So Franz Joseph created the dual monarchy, did this pretty much on his own. He was supposed to consult with the various parliaments, but did not. So he becomes the Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary. And this was negotiated partly with the Hungarians, but mostly Franz Joseph decided this was the best way to preserve his empire. And it's known as the Ausgleich, which means reconciliation or compromise. In this Ausgleich, Hungary gains full internal autonomy. Specifically, Austria and Hungary each have their own parliament and prime minister. Austria controls, when I say Austria, I mean Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but it's the Austrian side of it. They control war, navy, because they had the main seacoast, finance, and especially foreign. In some ways, the foreign minister had, the Austro-Hungarian common foreign minister had more power than the prime ministers. However, prime ministers had veto power over going to war. Both of them did, but only the Hungarian prime minister mattered. In return for all of this, the Magyars agreed to stick around. They renegotiated every 10 years. It's very cumbersome. And this is significant also. Over in Austria, the Germans, who basically ran the place, gave the minorities a lot of autonomy and will meet some major figures who play a great role in the Austrian common part of the empire who are not ethnic Germans. The Magyars, however, want to keep control for themselves, and this is a term a lot of historians use, Magyarize all the other ethnic groups in Hungary, which causes a great deal of problems. And the other problem is that the structure that Franz Josef set up made it very difficult for the Austro-Hungarian Empire to move fast in response to any situation. This is what it looked like in 1867. It's going to change from time to time, but in 1867, when they divided the empire, you can see how much of it, brown and the yellow, is under Magyar control, while the Austrian Germans control all the parts in green. That brings us to the Bosnian crisis, which lasted for 5 months. In 1878, the Congress of Berlin met to decide the outcome of the Russian-Turkish War. The Russians and the Turks had fought a war, and they had come to an agreement, but the European powers weren't happy with it, so they organized the Congress of Berlin, which did many things, but 2 things it did. It recognized Serbia, which had up to this point been a province of the Ottoman Empire. It recognized it as an independent country, and also authorized Austria to occupy, but not to control, or not to annex. They authorized it to occupy the Ottoman provinces of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which happened to be right next to Serbia. And this is significant because almost all the people in those 2 provinces were Serbs. Some of them were other ethnic Slavs, but mostly they were Serbs. This is what it looks like in 1878. Here you see the new kingdom of Serbia. Here you see Bosnia, which is hashed because it's technically still part of the Ottoman Empire, but Austria-Hungary is administering it, somewhat like the Palestinian Mandate after World War I. 2 other aspects in this map. This is Odessa. This is the main Russian port on the Black Sea. About 40% of Russia's exports go out of Odessa and other ports, which means they have to go through the Bosporus and Dardanelles, which the Ottomans control. This is highly significant because, jumping ahead a little bit, in around 1910 and 1911, Italy and the Ottoman Empire fought a war. Russia had nothing to do with that war, but the Ottomans closed the straits and Russia went into a depression, lost about a huge amount of its GDP, and it had huge economic impact. So they were very concerned about keeping the passage open. Why is this significant right now? Because in the summer of 1988, the Austrian Foreign Minister, Aehrenthal, decided, for reasons not important right now, he wanted to annex Bosnia-Herzegovina. This would violate the Treaty of Berlin, which only said he could occupy it. 𝘏𝑰𝑙sky, who at the time was the Russian foreign minister, for some reason, and he really shouldn't have, because 𝘏𝑰lsky and Aehrenthal did not like each other, and Aehrenthal had already played some dirty tricks on him, but 𝘏𝑰lsky decided to support Aehrenthal because he wanted Austria's help in opening up the Dardanelles. This is very confusing, and a lot of historians are still struggling over this. One thing I will say is 𝘏𝑰lsky got the support of the Tsar for his actions, but he did not inform the Russian Council of Ministers. Okay. However, in October, Aehrenthal played a trick on 𝘏𝑰lsky, again, not for the first time. He announced not the proposed annexation to call in a conference. He announced Austria was annexing Bosnia. This stirred a great deal of anger in Russia because Russia considers itself the protector of all the Slavs of the various sorts. Bosnia-Herzegovina are Slavs, Serbs, which are part of the Slavs. But also he caught 𝘏𝑰lsky off guard. 𝘏𝑰lsky was going around Western Europe trying to drum up support for the proposal. And he lied. He lied to the Council of Ministers. He lied to the European powers. He said there was no deal. Eventually, he's forced to resign, and Aehrenthal gives Berlin documents showing that 𝘏𝑰lsky lied, which Berlin then uses to blackmail 𝘏𝑰lsky, whom Aehrenthal gloats. This is the personality part again. He gloats over that. And this allows Berlin to use the documents to give Russia an ultimatum: stop supporting Serbia, which is opposed to the annexation. Remember, Serbia as independent Serbs, Bosnia-Herzegovian, mostly the people are also ethnic Serbs. Consequences of the Bosnian crisis. Russia no longer trusts Austria, had other reasons too, but they definitely no longer trusted Austria after Aehrenthals' dirty trick. And they resent Germany for forcing them to back down. This is a quote from Albertini, who was probably the most important historian of the World War I in the period between 1930 and 1950. It's a major, major work, in part because he actually got to talk to some of the principals who were still alive at the time. He interviewed many of them. So he says Germany was convinced that Russia would back down in the next crisis over the Serbs, over any Slavs. And they did, in fact, back down in 1912 and 1913. The Magyars, who remember, control half of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and are very ethnically oriented. They want everything to Magyarize. They don't want any more Slavs in the empire. And by the way, this is the point, when Austria annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina, they didn't exactly annex it into the whole empire. They put it under the control of the finance ministry. And the finance minister happened to be a Pole. It was another ethnic Slav. Again, the Austrians accommodate minorities. The Magyars do not. This is a quote from the Russian ambassador to Paris. Basically, it says that diplomats are now realizing that they can use force or threats of force, which is basically what Berlin did, as a tool of diplomacy. This is a big mistake. Even bigger mistake is the Serbs form a secret group called the Black Hand. It's also called Union of Death, but informally it was known as the Black Hand. This is to assassinate Austrian officials in Bosnia. They tried to assassinate the governors several times. They also went after Ottoman officials. 𝘞𝘕 who was called Apis, because 𝘞𝘕 was built like a bull, and Apis was the Egyptian bull god. He is one of the founders of the Black Hand. In 1903, he had led a group of other military people to assassinate the king of Serbia, king and queen. There were a number of reasons for it, but one of the reasons was that the king was too friendly to the Austrians. He will not be part of the government exactly, but he will become the head of the intelligence service. This is an example of what Apis was thinking was. Read the red part. This war derives from the duty of our race, Serbian ethnic Serbs, and generally ethnic Slavs, which will not permit itself to be assimilated. The irony here is that it was the Magyars who wanted to assimilate all the other ethnicities, and the Austrians, who controlled Bosnia, didn't want to be bothered with assimilating. They gave people autonomy. But this is how Apis saw things. To give you an example of what's going on in Austria-Hungary, there are at least 11, maybe more, ethnic groups in Austria-Hungary by 1914. Franz Joseph boasted that he could speak 10 of their languages. The chief of the general staff, Conrad, whom we'll meet later, said he was fluent in at least 7 of them. The Germans, who are a quarter of the empire total, did actually control most of it, although, as I say, they gave a lot of autonomy to the other ethnic groups. The Hungarians, who were only 1/5 of the empire, wanted to control. They did not want other ethnic groups in their positions of power. The various Slavs, this number is a minimum number. Some historians say it was 50%, but it was at least a third of the empire was of various groups of Slavs. This includes Bosnia-Herzegovina by this point, as you see here, around Sarajevo. Why this is important is in part because Russia, over here, saw itself still as the protector of all the Slavs. More significantly, Serbia also saw itself as the protector of the Slavs, although they were mainly concerned with the Serbs and Croats in the southern part of the empire, which included Sarajevo and Bosnia at this point. Other ethnic problems. Over here is Italy, which is interested in reclaiming the last group of Italians still living under Austrian control. This is known as Italia Irredenta, or unredeemed Italy. This is where we get the term irredentism. Over here is Romania, which cares also about Bessarabia, not on the map, but also about Transylvania, which is under Hungarian control, and the Hungarians want to Magyarize the Romanians. The Romanians are also a different branch of Catholicism than the Hungarians, and the Hungarians are trying to change that as well. Romania is very concerned about that. Remember, Romania is also a secret member of the Triple Alliance, which includes Austria-Hungary, so there's a bit of tension there. A side point, the Hungarian prime minister, whom we'll meet in a minute, owns a good deal of land in Transylvania. That brings us to the July crisis. Starts on June 28, 1914. This is an unfortunate date because several hundred years earlier, this was the date in which the Serbs in Kosovo lost a battle to the Ottoman Empire and became part of that empire. I won't exactly say they still celebrated that date, but they still remembered it. It was a major day for them. It also happened to be the anniversary of the marriage of Franz Ferdinand and his wife, who decided to make a visit to Sarajevo, Bosnian Herzegovian Serb part of the empire. And they chose that date, even though they were warned, this is not a good idea. This is the Serbian major day. Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the empire because Franz Joseph's son had killed himself several years before. The emperor didn't much like his nephew, Franz Ferdinand, but especially because he married the wrong woman, Sophie, but he did put up with him, and he did give him a lot of authority. So he was running a fair amount of the empire. He was not just a figurehead. He was really going to be the next emperor, and he already had a lot of power. Part of that power complication is that he was sympathetic to the Slavs. He was thinking about making a trialist monarchy. We had a dual monarchy, Austrians and Hungarians. Now he wants Austrians, Hungarians, Slavs. Chief of the General Staff, Conrad, was always gung-ho for war with Serbia. Franz Ferdinand had appointed him, was planning in July to make him step down from his post. He never got the chance because Gavrilo Princip shot him and his wife. Point is that Princip was a Serbian ethnic, but he was a subject of Austria-Hungary. He was not a subject of the Serbian king. There were actually a group of 6 or 7 assassins. They had all been given cyanide poison, but the poison had deteriorated and just made them very sick. One of them tried to jump in the water. Only Princip and one other person tried to throw a bomb, but it didn't work. Princip was the only one who actually tried and succeeded in the assassination. But they're captured. They're interrogated, not tortured, interestingly enough. They are just interrogated. But they admit that they were trained by the Black Hand, and that the weapons and the poison were smuggled across the border. To this day, and historians have been arguing about this for 100 years, they all agree that the Black Hand and Apis were responsible for the assassination, but they never understood how much the Serbian government actually knew about it. For the next week, the Austrian-Hungarian cabinet discusses, remember, this is the common cabinet that runs the empire. The Hungarian prime minister is a member of that cabinet, and he's opposed to war. And remember, he has a veto over war. Berlin has to be consulted because Austria is rather weak. Berlin is its only ally, and if Russia should get involved, Austria is afraid it cannot stand up to Russia on its own. And Russia might get involved because they want to do something with Serbia, and Russia sees itself again as the protector of the Slavs. They also have pragmatic interests in doing so. So the emperor sends a delegation to Kaiser Wilhelm. He writes a personal letter. These are not really personal letters. These are letters emperor to emperor, but they're drafted and worked on by the foreign ministry and other principals in the government. One of whom was Hoyos, who was the chef de cabinet, sort of like the director general of the foreign ministry. And he had written a memorandum prior to the assassination outlining how Austria needs to reign in Serbia. After the assassination, he modified it and sent it off by hand. Actually, it was delivered by hand to the Kaiser. And they don't tell what the Austria intends to do, but they expressed some worries about Russia and even more about Romania, because remember, Romania wants to get the Romanians back. And if Austria has to pull its forces out of Transylvania to go after Serbia, this may leave Transylvania vulnerable to Romanian attack. So the Kaiser reads both documents, and he is both the commander-in-chief of the army and the chief diplomat. He doesn't have absolute power, but he has a tremendous amount of power. This agreement, which you sort of did offhand, is called the blank check by historians. And I'll add this. He was impetuous, impulsive, mercurial, and he was one of Franz Ferdinand's few real friends. Where the Austrian Emperor did not like his nephew marrying Sophie because she wasn't high enough rank, Wilhelm welcomed both of them to his homes, and he made sure that Sophie was treated as her presumed rank deserved. Anything I post in blue in this color is an actual copy of the text of a telegram. Most diplomatic conversations were sent by telegram in these days. This is significant because telegrams theoretically went quickly, but they had to be encrypted by hand and then decrypted by hand and then passed around until they got from the Foreign Office to the principals involved. So it's not that simple. And telegraph wires could be cut, as they were. So this is the blank check telegram that the 𝘖𝘕 the Austrian Empire ambassador to Berlin, sends back to Berchtold, who is now the foreign minister in Vienna. Even if war broke out between Austria-Hungary and Russia, Germany would stand by Austria. The Kaiser also thought that Russia was not ready for war, again, going back to how Russia backed down in 1909. And then he adds that the ambassador writes that the Kaiser would find it regrettable if we didn't move quickly. Germany expected Austria to move quickly against Serbia while everybody was still hot, passions still, and Europe could understand an Austrian strike against Serbia. After all, they had just killed heir to the throne, but they didn't. For the next 2 weeks, they sit around and discuss things. And remember, 𝘞𝑰 still has a veto. Why did he want to go to war? He didn't like war very much, but mainly he was concerned about Russia. And the quote here is from 𝘏, the historian that I recommended. Other historians make similar comments. It's a very strange approach. Germany and Austria were concerned about Russia, but they weren't concerned about Russia. They were conflicted and confused, is the best way I can describe it. Tisza also was worried again about Romania, even though they were an ally, seizing Transylvania while Austria was off fighting the Serbs. And again, as a major, he did not want more ethnic Slavs in Austria-Hungary. And this is actually accurate. There was a judge at the time who had been appointed to look into things. He couldn't come up with a clear conclusion. Even today, historians can't come up with a clear conclusion. So it took the foreign minister a week to persuade the Hungarian prime minister to agree to war. Permanently is in parentheses because Austria did think it had to make some border adjustments for tactical reasons. They also proposed to Tisza that they would divide up Serbia and give it to Greece, Macedonia, and Bulgaria, or maybe Romania. They just could do what they wanted. And again, the Kaiser had said that Germany would restrain Romania. The Kaiser thought he could do this because the king of Romania was a cousin, Mr. Hohenzollern. Tisza has okay, but he still wants diplomatic cover. He doesn't want a quick strike. He doesn't want to strike without going to war first, declaring war. He wants a casus belli. So the cabinet now begins drafting an ultimatum. It takes them 5 days. At this point, French president is making a state visit to Russia. And remember, France and Russia are military allies. So the Austrians do not want the ultimatum, which is going to trigger a war. They've designed it to be rejected. But they don't want it sent while France and Russia are still actually talking to each other. So they're going to wait. And the chief of staff doesn't want to mobilize just yet. I'll explain the harvest policy in a minute because it is very important, but hold off on that. So they agreed to wait until Poincaré has sailed. Poincaré is the French president. Notice that he and his entourage, which includes the prime minister, sailed from France to Russia. Otherwise, they would have to take a train which goes across Germany. It was a little vulnerable. This means that while they are not out of touch, they don't have telegraph access. Okay, Germany is beginning to become aware. This is an arguable point. They don't seem to know the details of what Austria has in mind. But the Austrian chancellor, not the Secretary of State, who's essentially the foreign minister of Germany, but the German chancellor, sent a telegram to the ambassadors in the three major powers, spelling out what Germany's position is going to be, which is basically, if Austria doesn't pressure Serbia to accept its demands, it's going to lose its status as great power. He also says that he wants the conflict to be localized, 𝘞𝘰𝘕. This is a direct quote from the original text. By the way, I get these texts from the Brigham Young University online archives, an excellent resource. Again, the ambassador to St. Petersburg is particularly urged to make this point. Does Germany think Russia is ready for war? Kaiser says not. Bethman's not so sure. In any event, they don't want to take the chance. They're not sure what Russia is going to do. Okay, comes Thursday. Poincaré sails. That lets Vienna send its ultimatum. And Berchtold, actually, the foreign minister, according to his wife, he was up even the night before or 2 nights before, tweaking with the telegram, with the ultimatum, just to make sure it could not be accepted by Serbia. Oddly enough, the Prime Minister Pasic is out campaigning for the election. He knows a telegram is coming, but he's not out. The finance minister gets it. This is a quote of the text of the telegram from Berchtold to his ambassador in Belgrade, von Giesel. There are 10 demands. These are the critical ones. Highlighted parts, the organs of the imperial and royal government, the imperial Austrian, the royal Hungarian government, are supposed to oversee what the Serbs in Serbia are doing. This is a violation of Serbian sovereignty, and it was intended to be. If Serbia does not accept it, these are Berchtold's instructions to his ambassador. Unconditionally positive answer. If you don't get one, no extensions, no delays, day and hour of your announcing it. Pack up and leave. So, 48 hours. Kasic does come back. He's hauled back in by the finance minister to kind of talk him into it. They're frantically working on a response. Meantime, Austria tells its other ambassadors to tell them the contents of the ultimatum. This is ambassadorial courtesy, typical for diplomats. Now we bring in the British cabinet for the first time. And I want to talk briefly about the British cabinet because unlike Germany, Austria, and Russia, and even France, where the president had a great deal of power, cabinet runs the government on a consultative basis. The cabinet is made up of the members of the parties in power in parliament. If they resign or enough of them resign, the government falls. So the cabinet has to operate as a consensus. But they've been preoccupied with Ireland. Churchill, who was a member of the cabinet as a First Lord of Admiralty, calls the Austrian demand the most insolent document of its kind ever devised. Sapere, who is the Austrian ambassador to Russia, again another ethnic Hungarian, presents a copy of the ultimatum to the Russian foreign minister, and we'll see his reaction in the next slide. Sazonov then has lunch with the British and French ambassadors. Remember, Russia and France are allies. Britain is not an ally. It is an Entente member. They agree to cooperate, but they're not obliged. 𝘖𝘕 𝘕𝘏𝘕, the French ambassador to Russia, says, we'll honor our obligations. He has no choice, really. Buchanan says, well, we'll think about it. The quote in blue is from Buchanan's telegram back to the British Foreign Secretary. And this is what the Austrian ambassador to Russia reports back. The text is in German, but ambassadors often spoke to each other. Diplomats conducted language in French. So the quotes in French are in the original text. And this is not very diplomatic language on Sazonov's part. Vous avez brûlé vos ponts. You are burning your bridges. Vous mettez le feu à l'Europe. You want to set Europe on fire. He's very upset. And Sapari reports that he's upset. Okay, comes Sunday. They deliver their craftily diplomatic reply, but obviously they cannot accept the loss of sovereignty. So 𝘞𝘳𝘠 rejects it. There's stories that by about 3 o'clock he'd already known what the reply was going to be in the substance, but he couldn't have done everything he's doing in 3 hours. He knew. As soon as he handed over the report, the ultimatum, he started to pack his bags. Now, this is going to be very consequential. The Russian Council of Ministers talks to the Tsar, who's kind of wishy-washy, doesn't really want war, but is persuadable. Start a period preparatory toward war. This is not mobilization, but it's a step toward it. What is mobilization? This is complicated. I'm getting out of time, so I'm going to run through this. Railways, they used horses and foot. This was their main transport. Airplanes were nothing. Cars and trucks were just getting started. You want to move large numbers of people, you do it by railway. Russia had railways in very few places, and many of them touched near the German border. Very highly complex. This is true of all the mobilizations: Germany, Russia, France, Austria, Britain, not quite so much. Now, this is the harvest policy. Europe was still largely agricultural, and many of the soldiers came from farms. It was the custom to release them in the summer to go back to the farm for the harvest. Conrad didn't want to stop that because, among other things, it would alert all the other powers if they suddenly saw farm boys heading back to the army that they were mobilizing. This is mostly Russia's problem, partial versus general. Can you partially mobilize, or do you have to do the whole thing? We'll come back to that. This is the claim. It was never proven because they never stopped it or tried to stop it, or the one did briefly. The civilians were in charge, but they didn't always appreciate the complications of the mobilization, and the military didn't always explain them very well. And then there was Germany. This is the Schlieffen Plan, started by Alfred von Schlieffen, the chief of the general staff. This is in response to the Russian-France alliance, which now creates a two-front war possibility. Hermann von Moltke the Younger took over from von Schlieffen. He's the younger because his uncle, von Moltke the Elder, was the hero of the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, and the younger Moltke is always living in his uncle's shadow. Rapid mobilization, precise predetermined timing, everything is laid out in detail, cannot be easily modified. Strike first at France via Luxembourg and Belgium. Originally, Holland was included, but von Moltke took that out. He wanted Holland to be able to stay out of it so that German commercial traffic could still flow out through Rotterdam. But Luxembourg and Belgium, he had to have so that he could sweep around the French border and come in from behind. Then he's going to swing around and attack Russia to the east. In the meantime, the mobilization will be mostly against France. Some will be against Russia because he's expecting that Austro-Hungary, his ally, will hold off Russia. And finally, war follows automatically in the German mobilization. This is not true of any of the other mobilization plans, but that may not have always been clear to Germany, and the other countries may not have realized this. Come Sunday, French ambassador is talking to the German Foreign Secretary of State. Get Austria to accept Serbian responses. Conrad's again arguing. Meantime, the Russian foreign minister has now calmed down. He agrees that Austria needs to have some kind of Genugtuung, satisfaction or gratification, but that Russia will not accept the dismemberment or vassal state of Serbia. And Sapari is the Austrian ambassador to Russia as well. I want to briefly go into this because it's going to become important. Gray talks to Berthmann Hollweg, the chancellor, through the British ambassador in Berlin, Goshen. But he also talks to von Lichnowsky, who's Germany's ambassador in London. Lichnowsky sends telegrams to Bethmann, also to the Secretary of State. It's not always clear why. Secretary of State doesn't trust the chancellor. He thinks he's too wishy-washy, too easily swayed, and so forth. And Lichnowsky is an Anglophile. He speaks perfect English. He's lived in England for many years. He loves the country. He's a great friend of Gray's. The Germans don't trust him. Bethmann also communicates to Vienna through Cherski, who is a Serbophobe and really wants war with Serbia. Sometimes the Secretary of State edits Bethmann's draft. Whether Bethmann knows this or not depends on which historian you listen to. Bethmann and Jago also use the 𝘖𝘬𝘕, who's the Austrian ambassador to Berlin. Comes Monday. Lichnowsky tells Gray, use our influence to get Vienna to accept the Belgrade ultimatum. Why? We cannot be held responsible. Germany does not want to be held responsible for any war. So you have to persuade Vienna to look at the English proposal for mediation. However, at the same time, the Secretary of State meets with the Austrian ambassador and says, we do not identify with any mediation proposals, which is passing them on to accommodate the British. Does Bethmann know this? I don't know. Now the German ambassador to St. Petersburg is telling Berlin, Sazonov really wants some kind of punishment of Serbia, but not too much. For the first time, Gray asks the British cabinet, should we intervene? Several members threaten to resign, which again can bring down the government. Comes Tuesday, the Kaiser for the first time sees what Serbia said. They had been keeping him out of the loop. He thinks it should be enough. He wants Austria to do what's called halt and Belgrade. Essentially, the same thing Gray is proposing. The Kaiser's brother had met with King George, and he reports, we shall try all we can to keep, etc. This is in English in the telegram. The Kaiser will look at this and say to the admiral later on, his admiral, I have the word of a king, and that's good enough for me. He thinks the king can do in England what he, the Kaiser, can do in Germany. Not so. Meantime, the French ambassador to Russia is saying, don't worry, we will honor our alliance. The German foreign minister is worrying that all this pressure on Berlin is causing them to rethink. So he orders a partial mobilization, or he persuades the emperor to order a partial mobilization and declare war on Serbia, at which point an Austrian gunboat on the Danube, which is the border between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, but Belgrade's on that border. This is probably the only shots fired in anger for the next week or so. Bethmann sends instructions to his ambassador in Vienna. Did Jago edit it? Maybe, maybe not. We think he did. We think Bethmann agreed to it. This is the telegram, part of it. I'm running out of time. I'm going to just highlight. It is imperative that Russia bear responsibility. Germany does not want to fire the first shot. Try to persuade the Vienna to at least look at the Kaiser's halt in Belgrade program. And this is the paragraph that Yagov added that Bethmann may have agreed to. Don't give Vienna the impression that we want to hold them back. Poincaré returns to France. He's preparing for mobilization. The British cabinet, according to Ate, this is the first time they discuss mobilization, protecting Belgian neutrality, which they are obliged by treaty. They have an obligation to protect Belgium. No conclusion. Meantime, Gray is telling the German ambassador, if war breaks out, it will be the greatest catastrophe the world has ever seen. That quote, again, is sent in English in the telegram. But he says, if France and Germany get involved, we're going to have a problem. Okay, the Kaiser says we want general mobilization. The 𝘖𝘕 telegram is just between Kaiser Wilhelm, Willie, and Kaiser Nicholas, Nicky, and they called each other that, and they wrote in English. Willie says, no, let's see if we can make peace. So the Kaiser changes his mind, except you can't really have partial mobilization in Russia and then switch to general mobilization. The Kaiser tries it anyway. And Sazonov says, this is necessary. We want Austria to know that we are serious. Not Germany, Austria. This is a little complicated, but I put it in here because this is the German chancellor making an offer to London. We're going to invade France, but if we agree that if we promise you, London, that after we finish with France, we'll give all her territory back. Oh, and by the way, if we invade Belgium, which we're going to have to do, we will pay Belgium back for any damage. If that's okay with you, and it should be okay with you, please stay neutral. Now the chancellor tells his ambassador in Austria, Russia has started mobilizing. Again, please get Vienna to consider the mobilization so that Germany is not to blame. The generals go to Sazonov, the foreign minister, and say, we can't do a partial mobilization. It doesn't work. If we do it and Germany mobilizes, we have no time to do a general mobilization. Sazonov then goes to the Tsar and spends an hour convincing him of this. The Tsar agrees to it, but he says that he's condemning hundreds of thousands of Russians to their deaths. The White with Anger quote is from the historian Margaret Macmillan. Other historians say the same thing. Grey did not, as far as I can tell, consult with the British cabinet before sending his instructions to his ambassador in Berlin. And these are his instructions. And they're not very diplomatic. We cannot entertain a moment your offer. It would be a disgrace. We cannot entertain bargaining away our commitment to Belgium. And this is we're not committing to war, but we must permit our freedom. And you should speak to the chancellor in this sense, harshly. Well, actually, Ghosn does a little bit more than that. He shows him the telegram that Bethmann can read English. And he reports back to Grey that Bethmann is stunned by this, maybe because he's just dealing with the news that Russia is mobilizing. So he gets a copy. The British cabinet holds another meeting. They won't agree. And Austria officially rejects its mobilization offers and now starts mobilizing. Galicia is the Austrian province that borders Russia. So Conrad sending all his troops to Serbia. Now Bethmann instructs the German ambassador to Russia, and I put this in the German original and in the English. He's saying that Russia is making war against us, gegen uns, and we want it stopped. France begins mobilizing. They stay away from the German border so as not to give Germany any excuses. Churchill orders the mobilization of the Navy, which is Britain's major power. Britain is the most important power in Europe and even the world, largely because of its Navy. Russia doesn't say anything, doesn't respond to Germany's demand. Kaiser signs the order. This means war against France and Russia. The same moment, which is 7 o'clock in Petersburg, Courteles goes to Sazonov and says, do you agree to stop the mobilization? 3 times he asks, 3 times Sazonov says no. So as instructed, he tells Sazonov a state of war exists. An hour later, he tries to tell Berlin what he's done. The Russians have already cut the telegraph lines. I'm going to leave it at this, a confusing series of telegrams, because there's a whole cottage of industry of historians trying to figure out what exactly was Lichnowsky saying and what exactly was Berlin reading. But the Kaiser does decide we don't need to attack France now, for however it works. And at this point in the shouting match, he says to von Moltke, your uncle would have given me a different answer. So Moltke leaves. His wife later says that she was fearing he was having a breakdown. The British cabinet agrees on a statement. I'm going to leave this up. You can read it later in the recording if you want. Basically, it's very ambiguous, but it says, if you invade Belgium, public opinion is going to force us to do something. We don't know what it is. We won't tell you what it is, but don't do it. And because of the delays in transmission and encryption and decryption, it only arrives in Berlin after everybody's gone to bed, which includes the Kaiser. Kaiser summons Moltke to his bedroom after reading the telegram and says, okay, Moltke, you can do what you want. That quote is from Moltke's memoirs. The Kaiser likes to add marginal notes to all the telegrams. He's a voracious reader. So he calls Gray's message drivel, Gefasel. Come Sunday, Germany invades Luxembourg. 𝘖𝘶𝘳, the ambassador to the German ambassador to London. Don't invade Belgium. Britain's going to not like it. And there's going to be a Sunday meeting, which never happens. Germany masses troops. French mobilization continues. The British cabinet finally authorizes Gray to say something, but not quite enough. I put this quote in from the historians Hamilton and Hereward because they use the word substantially. Cabinet minutes, minutes of the cabinet meetings are hard to find. So I'm using the historians here. Comes Monday. Okay. Finally, the British cabinet meets and agrees. 4 ministers resign, but they are persuaded to hold off announcing their resignation. And that's not enough to bring down the government. The army is very small, but it mobilizes. This is considered one of the most important speeches in 20th century history in the parliament, where Gray explains what Britain has to do. Germany declares war on France, and then Germany does something absolutely stupid. They invade Belgium. Gray tells his ambassador in Berlin, Germany has invaded Belgium. Ask Germany. I don't put it as a demand, but it is really. You got to pull back. If you don't, he's instructed to ask for his passports, which means you're breaking off relations. So the king meets with the cabinet. There's no response by midnight Berlin time. Britain declares war on Germany. Oh, and finally, 2 days later, Austria-Hungary declares war on Russia. This satisfies Moltke's expectation that Austria will hold off Russia, while he's busy fighting France. It doesn't work, by the way. Conrad was too late and causes a disaster. Okay, very quickly to sum up. Austria sees Serbia as a threat. Then Serbia shoots the heir to the throne. Germany wants a quick response. Austria sits on it. Writes an ultimatum, which gets everybody's attention, including Britain. Britain tries to arrange one mediation. There's 2 mediations going on, but this is the first one. This is the second one. Should Austria and Russia mediate? Austria doesn't want that, so they declare war. Mediation proposals go nowhere, even though they're still trying to do it. Russia starts a general mobilization. Germany doesn't like it. Finally, Germany figures out that Britain might not stay neutral, but its attempts to keep Britain neutral are ham-fisted and don't work. In fact, have the opposite effect. So, Germany starts its war. Germany starts its war on Belgium. Britain declares war on Germany. Okay, a lot of misunderstandings here. I'm only going to go through some of them. Berlin thought that the great powers would stay out of an Austro-Serbian war. Berlin did not understand Russia, the feeling in Russia, and they were still thinking of Russia as in 1909 or even 1905, when they lost the war with Japan. They were not ready to go to war. Berlin really did think this. That Germany really did not have as much influence on Russia as they thought it did.
Dan, we just lost you for about a minute.
I'm sorry?
We lost you for about a minute. You were frozen.
You did?
Yeah.
Where did you lose me?
Oh, maybe about halfway through this slide.
Halfway through this slide? Okay, I can go back. Actually, you can read it. And come on, I don't know what happened. I didn't have any signal here. Okay. Everybody did not understand everybody. They were working in outdated assumptions, misconceptions, and didn't bother to check their assumptions as time went on. Other factors: ethno-nationalism, racial prejudice. The Magyars didn't like anybody. The Kaiser thought this would be war between the Teutons and the Slavs, Teutons being the German race, as before. The Russian ambassador to Paris has excellent observation. Force is a tool of diplomacy. No, it's not. Didn't understand that Germany mobilization was war. As we've seen, they didn't coordinate very well. They were inconsistent within their own governments. And finally, some common misconceptions, some of which are corrected now, some of which lasted for decades. Everybody tried to blame Germany, and then they tried to blame Russia or Austria. Everybody was to blame, except maybe Italy, because they were out of it. No, the generals did not force their governments to go to war. They pushed them once they started going to war, once they started thinking about it, but it was the diplomats and politicians who started it. And no, the war was not inevitable. And France did not go to war because of the Alsace-Lorraine. They went to war because of their obligations with the alliance with Russia. And in the documents that I've seen, they kind of given up in Alsace-Lorraine. They've accepted that Germany controls it. Nor did Russia go to war over the Dardanelles. They didn't even go near the Dardanelles until October, 3 months into the war, and they did it then because Ottoman Empire attacked the Crimea. At that point, Russia declared war on Turkey. Okay, last point. History doesn't repeat itself. This is true, but it often rhymes. Some similarities, which we can talk about or not. This is the last slide. Again, we have ethno-nationalist tensions in the world. We have government officials not working with each other. Imperialism is rising, Russia with the Ukraine. I'll leave out some other examples. Reliance of force and threat of force as valid tools of diplomacy. War had changed. How people went to war in 1914 had changed a great deal from 1871, and it's changed again today. This is the bibliography. I'll leave it up for a few seconds so you can look at it in the recording if you want. And now I will open the floor to whatever, and I'm only 14 minutes behind. Discussion time.
Well, thanks very much, Dan. And anyone who wants to speak, speak up, unmute yourself.
I had a question about the map, the ethnicity map. That I was curious. What was Ukraine back in 1914? Was that part of Russia?
Ukraine, most of what is now Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire.
Oh, okay.
Some of the Ukraine, or some Ukrainians who were called Ruthenians at the time, were in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there's a long, complicated history about warning that if not to go into it, but the Ruthenians became ethnically aware, and that's causing problems to this day. But at the time, they were mostly part of Russia.
Okay, thank you.
That's a wonderful presentation of an incredibly complicated story. I generally don't subscribe to the idea of as-ifs in history, but I've also wondered, and I wonder what you think, what would have happened if Britain had not entered the war. As you know, there was opposition, Morley and others in the cabinet. There was opposition to entering the war, and though they did have a treaty obligation to preserve Belgian neutrality, it was a little shaky, and it would have been a way dishonorable not to follow it. But I think Britain could have gotten away with not doing it. And I wonder, would it have made a significant difference? Well, obviously, it would make a significant difference, but would you care to speculate? Although, as I say, I don't really, as ifs aren't really all necessarily that proper. Would you be willing to speculate what would have happened if
I will
Britain had not
speculate.
entered
I
the
will
war?
speculate a little. I'll speculate a little bit. There was a memo written by Crow, one of the higher functionaries in the British Foreign Ministry that said, if we don't stand up and defend Belgium, we will lose all honor as a country. And if Germany wins, they will not bother treating us with us. And if Russia and France win, they won't want to treat with us. That said, public opinion by the time London sent that ultimatum, which Berlin ignored, public opinion was very much in favor of war. But that was only in the last few days. If Britain had not, and Britain was the major naval power in the world, not so much army, although they quickly developed one. And Germany really wanted Britain to stay out of it because British Navy could do a great deal of damage and did. If they had stayed out of the war, speculation that I've read says that they would probably have fought to a standstill. The war might even have gone on longer. It went on much too long as it was. And there were a few people, not many, but there were a few people who said back in July, this will not be a short war. Most people thought it would, but some people recognized this was going to be a long war. If Britain had not gone into the war, America probably would not, because it was German attacks on Americans' support shipping that brought America into the war, among other things. So I think they would have fought a lot longer, a lot even more bloody, and probably ended up with German Empire still intact. Would the Russian Empire be intact? Much harder to say. They were in much worse shape politically.
Dan,
Dan,
can
I
I?
have. Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I think Tammy was just close by a hair.
Dan, if
Tammy.
you were to distill one lesson from 1914, that might be relevant to today, what would we hope to take away from it?
Oh,
What?
be careful. Pay careful, consistent, and conscientious attention to what's really going on in the world, and don't act on your presumptions, assumptions, contra-assumptions, I just made up that word, and certainly don't be swayed by ethnic prejudices. Oliver, you were next, I think. I'm sorry, Steve, you were next.
Oh, that's fine. First, I'm Steve Harris. I'm a friend of Dan's. He asked me to join. I'm a Europeanist by training. I've worked in this area a fair amount, and I applaud, Dan, your bravado in trying to take this thing and do it in anything less than 4 or 5 hours.
I operate on the fool's Russian theory.
Well, there are few things more complex than this particular topic. So I would just offer an alternate view, not that Dan's take is wrong. Everybody has different interpretations. But I think that if Britain had not gone in, it's quite possible the Germans would have broken through to Paris. It was a close thing, as it turned out, in September. And if the Germans had been successful in knocking France back, they could have executed some version of the Schlieffen Plan, held off the Russians, and then everything starts to spin in a very different direction.
That's quite true. Germany was on its way to winning. Moltke made some mistakes, and Joffre didn't. Joffre, the French chief of staff, did not make any mistakes. But yes, it was very close, and Britain could not have stopped it in time. So I agree with you.
So, the other thing I would say, just among many others, is, there's obviously a lot of focus on the assassination of the Archduke. It was a fluke. On the ground in what was happening in Sarajevo, it could very easily have not happened. And to me, the real counterfactual is, well, then what does happen? What happens if the Archduke goes home that night, having had a nice visit?
Well, you're right. I mean, Austria is already planning to do something very nasty to Serbia because they considered it an existential threat. And in a great extent it was. I mean, the Black Hand had tried to assassinate 𝘞𝘈 𝘕𝘠𝘠, the Austrian governor of Serbia and the other governors and other officials there. So I think they would have gone out and they would have had less excuse, certainly if they had gone quickly into Serbia. The Romanian prime minister at one point said to the Austrians about at the end of July, said, why didn't you go in sooner? They would have accepted it. So it's a lot of what ifs. If the Austrian Duke, well, first of all, if the Duke had survived, the Archduke had survived, we would have fired Conrad. So that would have taken care of that problem. I think things would have gone, I think there, not the assassination so much, but the removal of the person who could stand up to Conrad and take down his warlike tendencies. That's where the difference might have been made. But it's an as if, what if?
So, Dan, during the middle of your presentation, I had a question in my mind.
Speak up a little, Jim.
What?
I can't hear you very well.
In the middle of your presentation, I was thinking, the question in my mind, what is in it for Germany? Why? I mean, towards the end, then you had a slide where you listed the various alliances and the misconceptions, but I still don't understand, why Germany went through with this when they certainly a number of people there recognized just how disastrous it was likely to be.
Well, a lot of it goes back to the personality of the Kaiser. The Kaiser did not have as much power as the Tsar, but he had a lot more power than the King of England. And he was the commander in chief. He was also the diplomat in chief. He was also a friend of Franz Ferdinand's, and he was probably upset at the idea of regicide. Also, Germany and Austria were each other's only real ally. Austria definitely needed Germany, but Germany kind of needed Austria as well. They couldn't hold off everybody on their own. Moltke, I didn't want to bring this up because it's an added complication. I couldn't talk about everything. But Moltke, the German chief of staff, was convinced that Russia was going to go to war against Germany, probably in 1917 or 1918, when it had built up its forces again after the Russian-Japanese War, which pretty much destroyed their army. And so he wanted to have a preventive war before Russia was ready. But he recognized, because of the alliance and the Schlieffen Plan, it would have to be a war against France and Russia, which is also why he designed it so that he would attack France first and then go against Russia, not just because Austria could hold them off, but because he didn't think the Russians were ready. And they were in better shape than he thought. As to why Germany wanted to do it, the Kaiser didn't like the Slavs sometimes. And the Kaiser's prejudices and whims and changes of mind. Also, he liked to play soldier. That's another thing. He was very gung-ho about going up to war, but when it actually came to the reality of war, he backed down. He tried to back up. He sent the 𝘞𝘕 telegrams to the Kaiser, to the Tsar, and he stopped this. He tried to get Moltke to stop the war on France, and then just rolled over and went to sleep. Okay, do what you want. So a lot of it has to do with the Kaiser's personality.
And that brings up another thought I was having all the way through, is just, I mean, we now have a would-be dictator whose whims can send us into war, can have international law is not something he thinks constrains him at all. So we have Stephen Miller saying, articulating the idea that power is power, and this is the way the world works, and a whole sense of not only that we need to get back to the time when great powers went to war based on the whims of personalities, but this is the way it always has been. And
yeah, Mike makes right. In this respect, all of the empires, possibly with the exception of England to some extent, although I phrase that very delicately, they all thought they could do what they want. This is the age of imperialism. One of the areas I'm not going to get into, but a lot of historians have, is the problem that Austria-Hungary had in that it didn't have any colonies outside of Europe. And the only way it could expand imperially was through the Balkans. And it was just, no, it's there, we can take it. They took Austria, they took Bosnia. They were going to break up Serbia. They all thought this way. But I will make one personal difference between Trump and Kaiser Wilhelm. Wilhelm was very involved in everything. He read voraciously in the, well, this is very famous for this, but I've actually seen the marginal notes. Telegrams went back and forth between diplomats. He read them. He made marginal notes on them. They were nasty notes when he called Gray a false dog in that telegram on the 29th. But he read it voraciously, and he was very involved in everything. He tried to keep calm. He didn't bother correcting his prejudice and preconceptions. But I think the present would-be dictator doesn't read a telephone book. Bertram. Bert, you're in. You're muted. Try holding down the space bar on the keyboard.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yeah, very, very interesting talk. And just out of curiosity, one of the issues for the Austrians, of course, was nationalism across the board. The Habsburg Empire was, went back to a much earlier age, and the Austrian elite, so to speak, felt threatened by Serbian nationalism, nationalism within the empire among the different groups, the Hungarians, etc. And I was wondering if you might say a couple of words about the role of nationalism, Serbian nationalism, nationalism to a certain degree within the Austrian Empire as well in creating this crisis in 1914.
Well, I presented two particular points on that. The Magyars, the Hungarians, I really want to call them Magyar because Hungarian just means anybody who's living there. They pushed Franz Joseph into the dual empire, and they did it because they wanted their own ethnic control. This is why they went after the ethnic minorities who were inside Hungary, trying to Magyarize them. Whereas the Austrians, the Germans who were the Austrian part of the empire, they had a Pole for a finance minister. They had Hungarians as ambassadors. They had they allowed the ethnic minorities a lot of autonomy. That included the Bosnian Serbs, but the Serbs didn't see it that way. To this day, in the 1990 Serbian war in Sarajevo, and the ethnic wars, the ethnic cleansing that they had in Kosovo and in other parts of Serbia. This is their thinking to this day. I hate to say it. That's where I put up Apus's line from his newsletter, that we must preserve our race in order it will be assimilated. Ironically enough, Austria went to war to eliminate Serbia as a threat. When the war was over, Serbia became Yugoslavia and controlled practically all of the territory of Austria-Hungary, where the South Serbs used to live. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, not Montenegro. All of that territory, which used to be Austria, was now run out of Belgrade. So Austria went to war and lost. But I think Austria tolerated ethnicity generally, but were particularly concerned not so much about the Slavs inside their empire, but about the Slavs, the Serbs outside their empire, because the Serbs were making violent efforts to dismember as much as they could the Austrian Empire. They were doing this. The Black Hand was out there assassinating people, terrorizing people, doing whatever damage it could to break up the Austrian Empire. They had a reason to call it a threat.
And then you had the assassination.
Again, was that the Serbian government? That's not so clear. Still not clear.
Thank you.
I'd like to interject a philosophical note, if I could. Here is that maybe isn't it kind of inherent in the beast that Homo sapiens are tribal and that we're always going to be getting into these war situations? It's just our species that we just can't help but getting into pissing contests because we're so tribal. And all these other things are all particulars, and there's nations and there's personalities, but we don't seem to be evolving into a peaceful species.
I think every time we try, we get knocked back, which is what Trump and Putin and Orban are doing right now. I think the American experiment was to some extent flawed and halting as it was. I hate to use the past tense, an attempt to move forward from tribalism. And with a lot of exceptions, it's not, I mean, I can think of a lot of objections to the statement I just made, so consider them made already. But I think well, the EU is an example, perhaps, where we are trying to move beyond tribalism. It's not easy. We associate the family, the village, the tribe, and maybe the country. You know, me and my brother against my cousins, me, my brother, and my cousins against the village, me and the village against the tribe, me and the tribe against the world. That's history. We have made efforts to get past it. We're being pushed back. No question. By the way, I shouldn't be the only one discussing these things. Leslie, unmute yourself. Leslie, we can't hear you. You're muted. Leslie, if you hold down your space bar, we can hear you.
Now?
Start over. So now we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I have two quick, not so quick because I used up the time looking at trying to unmute. This is a strange time to talk about it, but I think there is a very important modern ballet that was made in 1919 by a German choreographer whose name is Joos, Joos, and it's called The Green Table. I would recommend that you try and find it because it goes with Dan's point, which is a big, big point, that the diplomats were pushing towards war. Obviously, from what you've been saying already, it's amazingly detailed, but seeing this particular work is offering a very horrible but exciting presentation of how things worked. And it's called The Green Table, and it starts and ends with the diplomats, and also, well, there are a lot of episodes in it about children, lovers, soldiers, but death is the constant performer upstage. It is very much worth trying to see it. Then I have what's probably, unfortunately, a very small footnote, which is that the picture that Dan sent to all of us of this couple of people in a carriage, I had seen that picture probably since high school, but never with the lady in the carriage, only close up to the Archduke. So it was sort of a shock for me to see that picture and realize that nobody ever told me that she got shot too.
She did. She actually lost consciousness first. She was shot first. And Franz Joseph either didn't realize or didn't notice that he had also been shot, and he kept saying, "Sophie, don't die, for the sake of the children."
It's the
Princip.
first time I've ever heard that. And I think, obviously, she's not a diplomat, she's not, etc. But it's nice to know that her husband was upset about it. Please don't die. And it's a big. I think
This was a major love match. I mean,
yeah,
Franz Joseph married Franz Ferdinand married Sophie against his uncle's wishes, and his uncle was the emperor. They had to make it a morganatic marriage, meaning that her children would not inherit. And he did this for love. Princip, the assassin, actually said that he didn't mean to shoot her. He shot her first almost by accident. He didn't mean to.
Think of the millions of people, don't think about it, who he couldn't have, they all died. They all died. That's all.
That was
Thank
the
you.
idiots of war.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've gone on
I had
for
to rush it, and even then I went over.
almost an hour and a half. Any other questions for Dan
Or for the group.
or for the group? Yeah. If not, then well, thank you very much, and we hope to see you again next month, and every month except December.